things. Anyway, none of the bats escaped. As it turns out, they developed white nose syndrome, and those apparent differences, and I say here in the rate of infection, that just basically means one of the sites, white nose, became prevalent or was observed a lot more quickly. I'm standing right on the side. And then the other side eventually caught up, and they found white nose in that side as well. So these naive bats were brought in, and in one season, not only did they develop white nose syndrome, but also succumbed to it. There was mortality. The bats are still there. There are still some that are alive in some of the sites, but it does have some real important implications about the duration of impact. And by this I mean potentially we now know that these sites could, at least for 1 year, presumably for multiple years, remain infective to bats. Again, it has implications for human transport of this, of the conidia or the infective agents here. If people go in, if it's found in the sediment, regardless of how far or near it is to bat clusters, and people can pick this up, if it's in their boots and so forth, it could potentially be transported. And there could potentially be a fungal threshold. I was just trying to think of some ideas that would explain why they appear to get white nose a lot more quickly in one site than they did in the other. It might have to do with the burden of fungal spores or something in the site. Anyway, multiple implications here. Those are just some, but it does show that the site itself can be infected. So to jump here into a little bit of response and some of the management that's happening. Some of this is, again, these are rehashed. You've seen this before. I apologize, but Region 5, so the northeastern states and service, we pretty much were forced to deal with this thing immediately. There was no time to kind of think about what we're going to do when it gets here, because it was pretty much in our lap. So the initial response that we did was to focus on containment, try to make sure that this thing doesn't go any further than it would naturally. And that was kind of the main push that we had initially. The service in Region 3 and multiple states, I've got a couple up here, this is not a comprehensive list, are developing response plans, and I know we're going to hear a little more about that in a little bit. First talk, state response plans. But mainly these things have to do with monitoring and surveillance, outreach and communications, and coordination of lab and research. So some of the key actions that we have accomplished to date, initially we put together an investigation team based loosely or mainly on a conference call group of, I call it inter and extra agencies, so state and federal agency folks and academics and other biologists and people were part of this team. We developed a coordination structure at a meeting in Albany in 2008. We developed working groups to handle kind of immediate tasks and move us forward as a group in the investigation. The Fish and Wildlife Service of the Northeast region has developed a website. We call it the Nexus for White Nose Information. We're trying to make that the go-to place for not necessarily all the information, but links to partner sites and everything else, so that the public and professionals have a place to go to keep up with the information. So this is the site here if you're not familiar with it. Again, I mentioned containment. We've talked about, or initially developed decontamination protocols for caving and for bat research. Developed a cave advisory in March of 2009. I'll come back to these things in a moment. There's a structured decision-making initiative. I'm not going to dwell too much on this. I will talk about it a little bit, but there's a report that's out now based on a very comprehensive initiative that we undertook using structured decision-making to get at management recommendations, and then I mentioned earlier a national plan. So these ones in yellow, I'll switch sides to give you guys a break. These ones in yellow are the ones I'm going to talk about briefly here, although that's going to be tricky for
I got you.
Okay. And some of these, I know Hazel's going to be talking about decon, so I'm not going to dwell on this either, but just to give you an idea of the background, we initially came up in February 2008 with the first protocol. At that time, we had no idea what was causing this thing. It was based loosely on a couple of different infectious disease protocols that were out there for avian diseases and other things. Again, it was a scatter shot, involved a lot of bleach. It's very unpopular with the cavers because bleach eats through ropes and equipment and gear and everything else. but we were trying to do what we could at the time with the knowledge that we had. It was updated again in 2009. A lot of Hazel's work and input from Ann Bowman and others helped with that update, and we're currently revising it again. 5 minutes? Okay, I can do it. Cave Advisory, we came out in March 2009, again also not terribly popular with the caving community, but due to the threat for human transmission, the service came out with a recommendation that people stay out of caves. And this is a prophylactic kind of measure to try to limit the one thing that we could potentially limit here. We can't control bats. Bats are going to contact each other. They're going to transmit the disease, but we can have some influence on human action. And so this was an idea that we had, to come up with a way to get the information out there and to prevent the people from unwittingly spreading this thing. Again, this is currently being revised as well. The national plan, this again has been taking a lot of our time and is due, I think the draft is due out by this spring. The purpose is to guide the response of federal, state, and tribal agencies to white nose syndrome. There's a multi-agency approach here, and we'll go through everything. The plan will establish an organizational structure for the investigation and oversight that goes up to congressional kind of Washington level. Oddly, or interestingly enough, when we had the meeting in Albany, New York in 2008, we had the colony collapse disorder guys came, the bee just collapse problem, and they were there to advise us on basically how to address, how to manage a major catastrophe. And they talked about the levels of organization that they had, and they had kind of arrived at them organically, and they talked about these executive levels working with Congress, and at the time we're thinking, well, this is crazy, how do we get there, how do we do it? And sure enough now, this is the path that we're taking, and these things are developing as well for white nose. So it's a good thing. This information on the website, I won't talk too much about. This is based mainly on the chronic wasting disease plan and touches on 7 kind of key elements here. These are going to be working groups, formalized working groups under the plan, and we can talk more about that later. Structured decision making, we've talked a lot about this with a lot of different people. I won't, again, go into too many details, but we tried to address this one problem. What management measures should be taken this year to control the spread and minimize the effects of white nose on hibernating bats? Multiple objectives that we tried to address here. With this approach, maintaining viability of species, preventing the spread, avoiding unacceptable risks to cave obligate biota, so non-bats, minimizing public health risks, minimizing the number of bats killed through management and other actions, and provide research opportunities. Now, this is kind of, we got a bit ahead of ourselves, I think, because there are a lot of questions that we don't have answers to. One of the benefits, I think, for doing this exercise, though, is we did come up with these different zones, management zones, that we recognize that things that are happening in this area, which we call the epicenter, management concerns and state need and so forth, are much different than what's happening in what we call in Area 2, and then what's happening in Area 3. So we chose for this exercise to focus on Area 3, just because we thought that was the place where we could potentially do the most good to prevent a major jump from either the affected area, or what we're calling the mosaic or the leading edge area, into this unaffected area and cause, in effect, a new epicenter. So we focused that on for the